I pushed my cleaning cart into the supply closet, the wheels squeaking softly against the linoleum floor. The room was small, cramped with shelves of bleach bottles and stacks of folded rags, but it had a sink and an old, beat-up desk. On it sat a relic of a computer, a dusty, beige monitor with a keyboard that had seen better days. It was the work log terminal for the janitors, a slow, clunky machine that took 2 full minutes just to boot up. I glanced at it, then away. Not my business, but the footsteps in the hallway didn't stop. They grew louder, more frantic, a stampede of polished shoes and clicking heels. I heard voices, sharp and urgent, cutting through the dead-of-night silence of the 58th floor. Where is he? Is he still in the building? Get the legal team on the line, now. Tell them we have a crisis. The Apex room, now, everyone. I froze, my hand still on the handle of the cart. A crisis. At midnight, on the executive floor. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to stay calm. I was just a janitor, invisible. I could wait it out, finish my shift, and leave. But then a voice, one I knew all too well, cut through the chaos. It was Ethan Cole, Julian's chief of staff. He was breathless, his words tumbling out in a rush. Julian, Mr. Cross, we have a problem. A major one. The European legal team just served us with a global injunction. It's a coordinated attack. They're targeting all 37 of our overseas subsidiaries. If this goes through, we're looking at a freeze on operations across the EU. The losses could be catastrophic. A long, heavy silence followed. I could picture Julian Cross in his corner office, his jaw tight, his eyes cold and calculating. He never panicked, he never showed weakness. But I knew him well enough to hear the tension in his voice when he finally spoke. Get the legal department on a conference call. I want every partner in the firm on this, and find out who leaked the information. Someone in this building sold us out. More footsteps. The door to the Apex room swung open, and the murmur of voices grew louder. I pressed myself against the wall of the supply closet, my heart hammering. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be listening. But I couldn't move. Then, a new voice, younger, more frantic. Mr. Cole, I just got a ping from the security team. There's an anonymous email that came through the company system about an hour ago. It was flagged by our filters. It's a warning about the legal trap. It outlines the exact clause they're using against us. Ethan's voice was sharp. Who sent it? We don't know. It came from a burner account. But the analysis, it's brilliant. Whoever wrote it knows European law inside and out. They identified the selective jurisdiction clause and flagged the precedent from 3 years ago, the one that was partially overturned by the ECJ. A beat of silence, then Julian's voice, low and dangerous. Find them. I don't care how. Find the person who sent that email. I let out a slow, silent breath. The anonymous email, the one I'd sent from the old computer in the supply closet an hour ago. I'd seen the legal documents on a desk in the 56th floor break room, left out by a careless paralegal. The trap was obvious to anyone who'd spent years in Geneva. A selective jurisdiction clause, buried in the fine print. It was a classic move, designed to force a company into a hostile arbitration forum. I'd flagged it, sent it to Ethan's work email, and logged off. I hadn't expected it to cause a firestorm, but now, as I stood in the dark supply closet, listening to the chaos I'd set in motion, I knew one thing for certain. My quiet, invisible life as a janitor was about to get a lot more complicated. I pushed my cleaning cart to the side of the wall, and watched as 7 or 8 people spilled out of the elevator. Every single one of them had a grim look on their face, dressed in suits, some clutching briefcases, clearly people who'd been dragged straight from home. Leading the pack was Ethan Cole, Julian's chief of staff. He moved fast, already on the phone in a low, urgent voice. Get the entire legal department online, everyone in the conference room in 5 minutes. As they brushed past me, not a single person noticed my existence. Ethan's nearly clipped my cart, but he didn't even glance back. He just muttered a quick sorry and kept walking. They all funneled into the Apex room. The door wasn't fully closed. Through the crack, I could see the lights blazing inside, the projection screen already descending, a stack of documents spread across the conference table. Someone was arguing loudly, their voice sharp and frayed with tension. I was about to leave, but just as I turned, a sentence slipped through the gap in the door, crystal clear, drilling straight into my ear. They're filing for a global sales injunction. If it goes through, all 37 of Cross Industries' overseas subsidiaries will shut down. Direct losses are over 1.2 billion. My steps faltered. Global sales injunction. Those 4 words were all too familiar to me. I stood in the hallway, listening to the chaos bleeding out of the conference room, shouting matches, frantic keyboard clacking, Ethan's strained voice on the phone. On the other side of that door, everyone was scrambling like ants on a hot stove. Their chain of evidence is too airtight. We have no leverage. The Geneva legal team just sent an email, they say. They can only stall for 48 hours, max, 48 hours. What the hell is that supposed to do? After that, the injunction hits, and Cross's stock price will hit the circuit breaker tomorrow. I pushed my cart forward, moving slowly, but my mind was already racing, replaying that phrase. Global sales injunction, the most extreme temporary measure in cross-border commercial litigation. The bar for filing was sky high. You had to prove urgency, irreparable harm, and a strong likelihood of winning on the merits all at once. Getting an injunction of this level meant the opposing legal team was top tier, and their preparation was flawless on Cross's side, though it sounded like they'd been caught completely off guard. Not that any of this was my problem. I wheeled the cart into the janitor's closet, put my tools away, and washed my hands. I was about to change out of my uniform and clock out when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, a news alert. The headline read, "Cross Industries faces biggest overseas crisis yet, global sales injunction looming, stock price expected to plunge tomorrow." The media already had wind of it. That meant the news was deliberately leaked. The other side wasn't just hitting Cross legally, they were going for a dual kill. Public opinion and market pressure. This was a mature, well-orchestrated play. Whoever was pulling the strings wasn't messing around. I shoved my phone back in my pocket, grabbed my bag, and was about to head out. Then I heard a phone ring in the hallway, followed by the Apex room door slamming open. Ethan burst out to take the call, his voice cracking. "What do you mean the emergency arbitration in Geneva was moved up? It wasn't supposed to be until tomorrow afternoon." Whatever the person on the other end said, Ethan's face went white. 10 hours. We haven't even finished organizing the evidence. How are we supposed to? His voice choked off. The hallway fell silent again. Ethan leaned against the wall, his phone dangling at his side, a fine sheen of sweat beading on his forehead. The arguing inside the conference room had stopped, too. Everyone had heard that call. 10 hours. The other side had timed everything perfectly, always one step ahead. This wasn't a random skirmish. This was a calculated hunt. I put my bag down. The old computer in the janitor's closet glowed faintly in the dark, its case humming with a low, rattling buzz, like a half-dead old cat snoring. This machine couldn't even log into Cross's corporate intranet, and its specs were garbage, but as long as it could connect to the internet, that was enough. I walked over, pulled out the scratched-up office chair, and sat down. I pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life, slowly crawling past the boot screen and landing on the desktop. I opened the browser, typed in a URL, and hit enter. The page took 3 seconds to load, then displayed an English interface. I flexed my fingers and started typing. The keyboard was a cheap membrane model, the keys stiff and clicking with every stroke, but as my fingers landed on them, it felt like I was finding a rhythm I'd lost 3 years ago, starting slow, then picking up speed, smoother and smoother. Search keywords, filter relevant case law, cross-reference the opposing firm's past litigation strategies. Information scrolled across the screen in a blur. My eyes tracked it, scanning fast. 15 minutes in, I locked onto the core precedent the other side was using to support their injunction, a case from 3 years ago involving a European multinational. The facts were about 80% similar. The defendant in that case lost. The injunction went through. The company went bankrupt within 3 months. On the surface, it looked like an ironclad case, but I remembered this one. It had caused a massive controversy in Europe at the time, because the verdict was later partially overturned by the European Court of Justice. The overturned part specifically involved a key prerequisite for applying the injunction, and in their filing, the opposing lawyers had deliberately glossed over that prerequisite. It was a carefully laid trap, using a seemingly bulletproof precedent to support their application, while conveniently ignoring the part where that precedent had been corrected. If you didn't double-check the latest status of the case, you'd never spot the flaw, and Cross's legal team, already overwhelmed by the barrage of evidence, clearly hadn't had time to verify the validity of the cited precedent. I glanced at the clock, 4 minutes and change since I sat down. A security warning popped up in the bottom right corner of the screen, saying the system was low on memory. I clicked ignore and kept scrolling. Another minute to confirm the name of the European Court of Justice judge who issued the correction, the case number, and the effective date of the amended ruling. No problem, this flaw was fatal. If you pointed it out in the emergency arbitration hearing, the other side's injunction application would collapse like a sandcastle. Not only would the injunction be denied, but the opposing firm could also face sanctions from the tribunal for deliberately withholding key case information. I compiled everything I'd found into a document: case number, effective date of the amended ruling, a side-by-side comparison of the key clauses, and the official link to the European Court of Justice's ruling. Then I opened a disposable email account and typed in Ethan Cole's work address. Ethan's email was public. You could find it on the executive team page of Cross Industries' website. I attached the document and wrote a single line in the body: the precedent they cited has been partially overturned, point it out directly in the arbitration, detailed analysis attached. My mouse hovered over the send button. I hesitated for 1 second, then I clicked. The email whooshed out. I closed the browser, cleared the browsing history, shut down the computer, stood up, and grabbed my bag. The janitor's closet light clicked off as I walked out into the hallway without looking back. Behind me, in the Apex room, Ethan was still on the phone, frantic. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the first floor. Just as the doors were sliding shut, I saw Ethan glance down at his phone. His whole body jerked upright like he'd been electrocuted. He stared at the screen, his mouth hanging open, his expression shifting from confusion to shock, and then from shock to a kind of wild, disbelieving elation. Wait, he shouted, shoving the conference room door open and charging inside. The elevator doors closed completely, cutting off his voice. The floor numbers on the panel ticked down one by one. I leaned against the elevator wall, slinging my bag over one shoulder, thinking about how I could catch 5 hours of sleep after taking the late-night bus home. My next shift was the evening one, starting at 4. I could hit the supermarket in the morning. We were out of laundry detergent and dish soap. As for that email, someone at Ethan's level would verify it immediately. Once confirmed, he'd use it, he'd never know who sent it, and it wouldn't even cross his mind to suspect a janitor. That was perfect. We go our separate ways. No interference. The streets were empty in the early morning. On the night bus, it was just me and an old man dozing off. The bus rattled along for 40 minutes, and by the time I got off, it was nearly 1:30 in the morning. I walked under the dim streetlights back to the old residential building. After washing up and lying down in bed, my phone screen lit up: a company-wide notification from Cross Industries' employee system. Due to urgent matters, all active and on-call employees are to keep their lines open. Facilities Management Group B janitorial staff are temporarily reassigned to the morning shift. Report to duty at 8 a.m. I stared at the notification for 3 seconds. Morning shift. Since when did Facilities Management send out shift changes in the middle of the night? I didn't overthink it. I flipped my phone face down on the pillow and closed my eyes. Whatever morning shift it was, get it done early, get out early. Occasionally, a car passed by outside, the sound of tires on asphalt growing closer, then fading away. I turned over and quickly sank into a dreamless sleep. Meanwhile, in the Apex room on the 58th floor of Cross Tower, the lights burned all night long. When my alarm went off, the sky hadn't fully brightened yet. I fumbled for my phone, silenced the alarm, lay in bed for 2 minutes, then rolled out. The water heater in this old building was hit or miss. Today, luck was on my side. I twisted the faucet all the way to the left, waited a few seconds, and the water ran hot. I took a quick shower, changed into my uniform, and tied my hair into a low ponytail. There were still some steamed buns in the fridge from yesterday. I steamed 2 and ate them with a glass of plain water. Before heading out, I checked my phone. Another notification from Cross's internal system, worded almost identically to the one from earlier, except it changed the morning shift start time from 8 to 7:30. Guess last night's mess was bigger than I thought. At 7:10 in the morning, I arrived at Cross Tower. I entered through the side door, and the basement facilities department was already buzzing. Early shift janitors were gathered in small groups outside the locker room, eating breakfast, some gnawing on Bowsy, others sipping soy milk. The air smelled like chives. Maggie was standing by the time clock, holding a folder. She waved me over as soon as she saw me. "Hey, Sierra, come here." I walked over. She flipped through the folder, pulled out a temporary schedule, and handed it to me. "We're short-staffed on the early shift today. I need you to handle the morning cleaning for floors 56 through 58, finish by 10. After that, the group has an important meeting, and the Apex room needs a thorough going over." The Apex room, they'd spent the entire night in that conference room. It was bound to be a mess in there. Got it. I took the schedule, changed into my uniform in the locker room, and pushed my cleaning cart onto the elevator. The digital screen inside was looping a corporate video for Cross Industries. The footage showed Julian Cross in a dark grey tailored suit, sitting behind a massive desk, his expression cold and distant as he stared into the camera. A deep male voiceover intoned, "Cross Industries, operating in 37 countries and regions worldwide, is dedicated to defining the rules of the industry. I stared at that face on the screen for 2 seconds. 3 years of marriage. I could count on one hand the number of times he'd eaten at home. When he did come back, he'd lock himself in his study, I'd cook, bring the tray to his door, knock 3 times, set it on the floor, and walk away. The next morning, the tray would be empty, the dishes washed and stacked neatly on the kitchen island. Sometimes he'd leave a note with the word thanks written on it, the handwriting as precise as a printed font. It wasn't good, and it wasn't bad. He was just a stranger living under the same roof. The elevator reached the 56th floor. I pushed my cart out and started working. Morning cleaning was simpler than the night shift, mostly emptying trash, wiping down desks, and airing out the conference rooms. I finished the 56th floor in half an hour, then moved up to the 57th. The break room sink on that floor was piled high with used coffee cups, a ring of brown residue crusted around the rim. I squeezed some cleaner onto a scouring pad and started scrubbing slowly. Halfway through, I heard the elevator doors open in the hallway, followed by a flurry of footsteps. I poked my head out of the break room and saw people from the legal department. Their faces were haggard, their suits wrinkled, their ties hanging loose. Around their necks a clear sign they'd pulled an all-nighter. 2 of them were talking in low voices, their voices raspy like sandpaper scraping against iron. Thank God for that email, otherwise, the entire legal department would have been packing their bags last night. You're telling me, you should have seen Chief of Staff Cole's face. He was about to cry. Who the hell sent that email? To dig up a corrected ruling from the European Court of Justice? What kind of skill level is that? No idea. Cole's keeping his mouth shut tight, not a word. As they passed by me, I kept my head down, scrubbing the tea stains on the sink edge. My scouring pad moved up and down in a steady rhythm. Without a pause, they didn't notice me. A few lawyers, exhausted from a night of work, their brains fried. Why would they spare a glance at a janitor scrubbing a sink in the corner? After finishing the break room, I pushed my cart up to the 58th floor. The moment the elevator doors opened, I could feel the tension in the air. At least 7 or 8 people were standing in the hallway, legal, administrative, and a few men in black suits with earpieces, definitely security. Everyone was talking in hushed voices, but the hallway was eerily quiet. It was the kind of quiet that felt like something invisible was pressing down on you, making you walk lighter and speak softer. The doors to the apex room were wide open. I pushed my cart forward slowly, letting my eyes drift over the room. The conference table was covered in documents and laptops. The projection screen was still down, frozen on an English document filled with dense legal jargon. A few people in suits were gathered around the table, talking in low voices. Their expressions were serious but noticeably more relaxed than the night before. Then I saw him, Julian Cross. He was sitting at the head of the table, one hand propping up his forehead, the other flipping through a folder in front of him. His shirt sleeves were rolled up past his elbows, his tie was gone, and the top 2 buttons of his collar were undone. The lines of his profile were sharp under the cold lead lights of the conference room. High cheekbones, a straight nose, a jawline that looked like it had been measured with a ruler. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were sharp, not the sharpness of excitement, but the alert, predatory gleam of a hunter catching the scent of prey. Spread out in front of him was a printed copy of an email. My email. Ethan Cole was standing beside him, holding a cup of coffee, his lips pale and dark circles under his eyes. He leaned in and whispered something to Julian. Julian didn't look up, just grunted in acknowledgement. I pulled my gaze away, turned my cart, and headed into the janitor's closet at the other end of the hallway. The old computer was still there, the dust on the desktop wiped clean from my visit yesterday. I put my cleaning tools away, grabbed a cloth and a bucket, and got ready to clean the break room. Next to the apex room. As I stepped out of the closet, I nearly ran into someone. Ethan Cole. He was walking fast from the other end of the hallway, phone in hand, and almost collided with me. He instinctively stepped back, muttered, "Sorry," and then looked up at me for a split second. His expression didn't change. "It's fine." I lowered my head and stepped aside to let him pass. He walked past me, took 3 or 4 steps, and then suddenly stopped. I kept pushing my cart forward, my pace steady, my speed unchanged. Behind me, there was 2 or 3 seconds of silence. Then I heard Ethan's voice from behind, laced with a hint of uncertain hesitation. "Wait a second." I stopped and turned to look at him. Ethan stood there, his brow furrowed deeply, his eyes scanning me from head to toe. His gaze lingered on my face for a few seconds, then dropped to my grey janitor's uniform, then back to my face. He opened his mouth, like he was trying to recall something. "You," he paused, "have we met before?" 3 years ago, when I married Julian, the wedding was just a small family ceremony. 2 tables of people, all close relatives of the Cross family. Ethan, as Julian's chief of staff, was there that day, helping to greet the guests. He'd seen me in my wedding dress, he'd even smiled and called me Mrs. Cross during the toast, but that was 3 years ago. For 3 years, I'd stayed in the Cross estate, keeping a low profile, never attending any public events. Julian never brought me to any functions, and I never showed up in front of him uninvited. We'd been husband and wife under the same roof for 3 years, but I'd probably seen him less than Ethan saw him in a single day. And now, I was wearing a baggy grey uniform, no makeup, my hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. I was a far cry from the bride in the custom dress with the light makeup. "You might have the wrong person," I said calmly. Ethan stared at me for another 2 seconds, the confusion in his eyes slowly faded. He rubbed his temples, probably thinking he was seeing things after a sleepless night. "Sorry, my mistake." He waved his hand and turned to continue walking. I pushed my cart into the break room, set the bucket on the floor, and turned on the faucet. The sound of running water drowned out all the noise from the hallway. Ethan's footsteps grew fainter and fainter, until they were finally cut off by the closing door of the apex room. I turned off the faucet, soaked the cloth, wrung it out, and started wiping down the counter. The polished marble surface reflected a blurry image of my face, a face with no expression at all. By 10 o'clock, I had finished cleaning the entire area outside the apex room. As I passed by the conference room, the people inside were still in their meeting. Julian's voice filtered through the door, low and clear, like a piece of cold iron striking stone. "The person who sent that email, I want to know who it is by the end of today." No one answered him. I pushed my cleaning cart into the elevator and pressed the button for B1. The facilities department lunch break started at 11:30. I went to the cafeteria, got a plate of tomato and egg stir-fry over rice, carried my tray to a corner table, and ate slowly, bite by bite. Halfway through, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a local number that didn't look like a sales call. I answered. "Hello, is this Sierra Vance?" A young woman's voice, businesslike. "Yes, I'm calling from Human Resources at Cross Industries. Your onboarding file is missing a background check report. We need you to submit it this afternoon. Is that possible?" A background check. Maggie had mentioned it when I was hired, saying I needed to get it done before signing the formal contract. I'd said okay, but in the chaos of the past couple of days, it had slipped my mind. "Sure, I'll go to the police station and get one this afternoon." "Great, thank you. Once you have it, just drop it off at the facilities department office on B1. The call ended. I put my phone back in my pocket and went back to eating. At 2 in the afternoon, I took the bus to the local precinct during my break. The line wasn't long. I filled out a form, waited half an hour, and got the report, a single sheet of A4 paper, stamped with a red seal, stating that Sierra Vance has no record of criminal activity in this jurisdiction. I folded the report, put it in my bag, and took the bus back to Cross Tower. When I got to B1, the door to the facilities department office was slightly ajar. Voices were coming from inside. I knocked. "Come in." I pushed the door open. Maggie wasn't alone. Ethan Cole was there too. He was sitting in the chair across from Maggie, holding a folder, flipping through it. When he heard the door open, he looked up, and our eyes met. "Sierra, you got the report." Maggie smiled and waved me over. "Perfect timing. Bring it here." I walked over and placed the background check on the desk. Maggie picked it up, glanced at it, nodded, and set it aside in a folder. Ethan watched me the entire time. His gaze was different from the one in the hallway. That time, it was confusion, a dazed hallucination from a sleepless night. This time, it was scrutiny, an investigation, a focused attempt to read something from my face. "Chief of Staff Cole, do you know Sierra?" Maggie asked cautiously. Sensing the tension in the air, Ethan didn't answer her. He kept his eyes on me, and when he spoke, his tone was flat, but every word felt like it had been bitten off before being released. At 12:43 this morning, the company received an anonymous email. I held his gaze, saying nothing. The email's sending IP address was traced to the 58th floor of Cross Tower. Maggie sucked in a sharp breath. In my 2 days at Cross Industries, I'd already picked up a few things. The 58th floor was the executive suite. Anyone there past midnight had to be either a lawyer burning the midnight oil, a senior executive, or the night shift janitor responsible for that floor. And last night, the night shift janitor on the 58th floor had been me. That email saved the company a $1.2 billion headache. Ethan paused, his eyes locked onto mine without blinking. The sender used a low-end terminal with an outdated operating system, no connection to the corporate intranet, and sent it through public Wi-Fi. The device he described matched the old computer in the janitor's closet perfectly. Ms. Vance, Ethan said, his tone polite but leaving no room for evasion. Were you on the 58th floor last night? Yes, I said. I was the night shift cleaner, responsible for floors 56 through 58. Then did you use the computer in the janitor's closet? No. I met his eyes, my voice as flat as a dead calm. That computer is for logging work hours. I haven't learned how to use it yet. Ethan stared at me for 3 seconds. After those 3 seconds, he nodded, closed the folder in his hand, and stood up. Sorry for the interruption, he said, then turned to Maggie. Maggie, could you pull last night's shift schedule for me? Sure, of course. Maggie hurried over to the filing cabinet. Ethan walked past me. When he reached the door, he paused. He didn't turn around, just tilted his head slightly, as if there was something else he wanted to say. But in the end, he said nothing and pushed the door open. Stepping out, the office fell silent. Maggie let out a long breath, patting her chest, muttering, "That scared me, that scared me," then looked up at me, her eyes full of curiosity and gossip. Sierra, what was that email Ethan was talking about? What 1.2 billion? I don't know. I clipped my badge back on. Maggie, I need to get back to work. Hey, I pushed the door open, leaving her curiosity locked inside the office. The fluorescent lights in the hallway cast a harsh white glow, making the floor gleam with a cold sheen. I walked at a steady pace, the wheels of my cleaning cart rolling over the tiles with a soft, rhythmic scrape. My mind was clear. Ethan was already investigating. If he'd gotten this far, it meant Cross Industries' information security team wasn't just for show. The IP had been traced to the 58th floor, the device specs matched, the scope was narrowing fast. The only reasons they hadn't zeroed in on me yet were, first, the lack of direct evidence. That old computer had no login system, so there was no way to trace usage, and second, the sheer improbability of the identity. Their instinct wouldn't let them believe a janitor could pull something like this. But the look Ethan had given me today was different from this morning. He was suspicious. Whether or not he could connect the face of Sierra Vance to the face of that bride from 3 years ago, at least on his list of suspects, I'd been marked with a big red circle. I pushed the cart into the elevator and pressed the button for the 56th floor. The elevator rose slowly, the digital panel ticking up 1 floor at a time. When the doors opened on the 56th floor, I wheeled the cart out and started the afternoon routine. White-collar workers moved back and forth through the hallways. Some were on the phone, some were waiting in line at the copier, some were leaning against the counter in the break room, chatting over coffee. No one paid any attention to a janitor pushing a cart past them. I vacuumed the hallway on the 56th floor, then entered the women's restroom. It was empty. I grabbed the mop and started mopping. By the time I reached the 3rd stall, the restroom door swung open. 2 young women walked in. From their badges, they were from the administrative department. They stood at the sink, touching up their makeup, one applying lipstick, the other fixing her hair, chatting idly. Did you hear? Legal almost got wiped out last night. How could I not? My boyfriend's in legal. He didn't get home until 4 in the morning, collapsed into bed like a dead man. That's serious. Worse than you think, he said. If it weren't for that anonymous email last night, Cross Industries stock would have hit the circuit breaker today. Legal collectively offering their resignations would have been the lightest outcome. The one applying lipstick clicked her tongue. So the person who sent that email is a hero, right? Is Mr. Cross planning to reward them? Reward? They can't even find the person. The one fixing her hair lowered her voice, a hint of gossipy excitement creeping in. My boyfriend said Mr. Cross gave a direct order, turn the entire building upside down if you have to, but find that person. And then he said something really chilling. What? He said, whoever it is, when you find them, either bring them into the fold. She paused, pursing her lips at the mirror, or make sure the competition never gets to them first. The restroom went silent for a moment. The 2 women exchanged a glance, both shrinking their necks slightly, then laughed it off, changing the subject, and pushed the door open, leaving my mop kept moving across the tiles, rhythm unchanged, but my mind was racing over that last sentence. Julian Cross. I'd been his nominal wife for 3 years. I knew a thing or two about how he operated, decisive, cold, profit-driven. When he said either bring them into the fold or make sure the competition never gets to them first, he meant there was no third option. If he found out the email sender was some random tech genius, he'd throw money and resources at them to recruit them. But if he found out it was me, the ex-wife he'd personally signed off on and kicked out, things got complicated. When it came to me, the most rational move would be to pull me back into his camp, but I knew him too well. A man like him hated nothing more than uncontrollable and unexpected, and my very existence was the ultimate mockery of his judgment. He thought I was illiterate, thought I was good for nothing but following orders, thought I was a vase he could just set aside and forget about, but that vase had a knife hidden inside, and that knife had just saved his life when he was at his most desperate. To him, that was help, but it was also humiliation. He wasn't going to swallow that easily. I rinsed the mop in the bucket, wrung it out, and kept mopping the remaining tiles. The clearer my thoughts became, the steadier my hands moved. What was there to be afraid of? Worst case, they'd find me out. Worst case, I'd quit and leave. This city was big enough. There were plenty of jobs I could do. Julian Cross might have long reach, but he wasn't going to murder his ex-wife just because she refused to come back to him. Besides, he still didn't even know who I was. At 5:30 in the evening, I finished my afternoon shift, wheeled the cleaning cart back to the janitor's closet, and got ready to head to dinner. Just as I reached the elevator, I heard hurried footsteps from down the hall, accompanied by Maggie's breathless shouting, "Sierra, Sierra, wait." I turned around. Maggie was running toward me. In her heels, her face a mess of emotions, excitement, nervousness, and a hint of something I couldn't quite name. "Maggie, what's wrong?" "You." She stopped in front of me, gasping for air, then grabbed my arm. "Do you know Mr. Cross?" My heart skipped a beat, but my face stayed still. "Mr. Cross? Which Mr. Cross? How many Mr. Crosses are there?" "Julian Cross." Maggie's eyes were wide. "Ethan just pulled your onboarding file." The moment he finished reading it, his face changed completely. "He grabbed a copy of your ID and ran straight upstairs. And then what?" "And then Mr. Cross himself gave the order to seal your file. No one is allowed to access it. He also ordered a full review of the building's security footage from the past 3 months. They're doing a comprehensive sweep." She took another ragged breath, her grip on my arm tightening. "Sierra, be honest with me. Who the hell are you?" I looked at her panicked face and almost found it funny. Who was I? I was the ex-wife Julian Cross had signed off on and thrown away. I was the invisible woman who'd lived in the Cross estate for 3 years without anyone remembering her face. I was Sierra Vance, the janitor who'd started yesterday. One person could be all 3 of those things at once. But the shock of those 3 identities colliding was more than a facilities supervisor like Maggie could handle. "Maggie," I said, gently prying her hand off my arm, my voice calm, "I'm just a janitor, it's all. They're in my onboarding file. But, don't worry. Whatever happens, it's not your problem." Maggie stared at me, her mouth open, looking like she had 1,000 things to say but didn't know where to start. The elevator dinged, the doors slid open. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the first floor. As the doors closed, I saw Maggie still standing there, phone clutched in her hand, looking like the sky was falling. The elevator descended, the digital panel ticking down. I leaned against the wall and let out a breath. Julian Cross had seen a copy of my ID. He must have recognized me by now. Sierra Vance was a common enough name, but paired with my ID number, home address, and photo, it was enough for him to confirm. His ex-wife, the woman he'd divorced just yesterday, now wearing a janitor's grey uniform, mopping floors and scrubbing toilets in his own company. What expression was he wearing right now? Shock, anger, or that cold, silent fury that came from feeling toyed with? I couldn't imagine it. In 3 years of marriage, I'd rarely seen him show any outward emotion. He was always that icy mask, like the whole world owed him money. The elevator reached the first floor, the doors opened, the crystal chandelier in the lobby blazed with light. I walked across the lobby toward the side exit, heading to the employee cafeteria for dinner. I'd only taken a few steps when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, a text message. The sender was a number I hadn't saved, but I recognized it, Julian Cross's personal cell. The message was just one line: "Come to the 58th floor, now." I stopped in my tracks. The lobby was bustling with people, some heading home with briefcases, others rushing past with stacks of papers. Soft music played over the speakers, reminding everyone to be careful on their way out. Everything was normal, except for the phone in my hand, glowing with a single line of text, like a bomb that hadn't gone off yet. I stared at those words for 5 seconds, then I slipped the phone back into my pocket, turned, and walked toward the elevator. What's coming will come, no point hiding. Better to face it head on than have him send someone to drag me up. Whatever it is, blessing or curse, there's no dodging it. The elevator climbed. At the 23rd floor, 2 programmers got on, chatting about code and deadlines. They didn't notice the janitor standing in the corner. At the 37th floor, a girl got on, clutching a cardboard box, probably someone leaving, packing up her desk. Her eyes were red, her nose pink, like she'd just been crying, floor by floor. People came and went by the 52nd floor. The last person stepped off. For the next 16 floors, I was alone in the elevator. The numbers on the panel crept closer to that familiar floor, 56, 57, 58. The elevator chimed, the doors slid open. The 58th floor's hallway was carpeted in deep grey, the artwork on the walls glowing softly under the lights. I'd walked this corridor countless times over the past 2 days, mopping, wiping handrails, emptying trash cans. I knew every loose floorboard, every trash bin that tipped over easily, with my eyes closed. But this time was different. The moment the elevator doors opened, I saw someone standing at the far end of the hallway. Julian Cross. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket, just a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He leaned against the window at the end of the hall, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a file. When he heard the elevator, he turned his head. The hallway was long, at least 20 meters between us, but even from that distance, I could see the storm in his eyes, shock, confusion, barely contained anger, and something else, something I couldn't quite name, but I could feel, a strange, sharp brightness, like a leopard that had been stalking through the grass all night, finally seeing its prey's true face. He started walking toward me, not fast, his leather shoes barely made a sound on the carpet, but with every step he took, the air around me tightened. When he was 3 steps away, he stopped. Sierra Vance. He said my full name. In 3 years of marriage, he'd never once called me by name. When he needed to say something to me, he'd just look at me and say, "Hey," and I'd know he was talking to me. Sometimes he wouldn't even speak, he'd just leave something on the table, and I'd understand. This was the first time he'd ever said my name. His voice was soft, like he was weighing each syllable on his tongue. "That email yesterday," he said, his eyes locked on mine, sharp and precise as a letter opener. "You sent it. It wasn't a question, it was a statement." I didn't admit it, I didn't deny it, I just stood there, wearing a grey uniform 2 sizes too big, sleeves rolled up, my hair a little messy from a long afternoon in the restrooms. "That loophole," Julian continued, not looking away. 37 people in the legal department worked all night and didn't find it. The opposing firm hired one of the top 3 litigation teams in Europe. There aren't 10 people in the world who could have spotted that weakness in an hour. He took a step closer. "In my whole life," he said, his voice suddenly very quiet, "I've never felt like such a fool." I met his gaze. I didn't say a word. He stared at me for a long time, so long that the motion sensor lights in the hallway dimmed, thinking no one was there. As the light faded, his eyes turned slightly red at the edges, but a slow smile crept onto his lips. "Ethan," he raised his voice. Ethan Cole appeared from around the corner, his professional composure completely shattered. His face was a mess of confusion, clearly thinking, "I don't know what's going on, but the boss said to investigate, so I did." "Stop the investigation," Julian said, his eyes never leaving me. "We found her. No need to keep looking." "Found her?" Ethan glanced around instinctively. "Where?" Julian ignored him. He just kept looking at me, his gaze moving from my eyes to the space between my brows, to my cheekbones, to my slightly flushed cheeks from working all day. The shock and anger were gone from his face, replaced by something deeper, thicker, like a man who thought he'd dropped a worthless pebble, only to bend down and pick it up, realizing it was a diamond, and now he was starting to understand he might never be able to put it down. "Mr. Cross," I finally spoke, "if there's nothing else, I need to go eat. The cafeteria closes at 6:30. With that, I turned and walked toward the elevator behind me. There was 3 full seconds of silence. Then I heard his footsteps, faster than before, much faster. Julian was quicker than me. Before I reached the elevator, he was already in front of me, blocking my way. He was tall. Standing in front of him, I had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. The hallway lights behind him cast his face in shadow, making it hard to read his expression, but I could feel the pressure radiating off him. "Eat," he repeated the word, as if it were the most absurd joke he'd ever heard. "You've been hiding in my company for 2 days, sent an email worth 1.2 billion, and now you're telling me you need to go to the cafeteria. The cafeteria closes at 6:30, I said calmly. "If I go late, there won't be anything left." Julian's mouth twitched. Behind him, Ethan's jaw dropped, staring at me like I was out of my mind. "Ethan," Julian called without turning around. "Yes, Mr. Cross, tell the cafeteria to set aside a table and send it up to the 58th floor. Ethan froze for a second, clearly not expecting that his boss's first move after chasing down his ex-wife was to feed her, but he'd been Julian's right-hand man for 5 or 6 years. He recovered fast, pulling out his phone to make the arrangements. "No need," I said. I don't like eating in conference rooms. Julian looked down at me. The hallway went quiet for 2 seconds. Then he laughed. In 3 years, I'd seen him laugh maybe once or twice. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone so furious they found it funny. The curve of his lips was shallow, but his eyes were dark, like the ocean before a storm. Sierra Vance, he said, his voice low, so low only the two of us could hear. What else are you hiding? Nothing, I said, meeting his gaze. You never asked. That sentence hit like a needle, slipping into something soft. Julian's pupils contracted slightly, his jaw tightened, then loosened, then tightened again. He didn't say anything else. The elevator chimed, the doors opened, empty inside. I walked around him and stepped in, pressing the button for B1. The doors began to close. Just as they were about to shut completely, a hand shot in, jamming the gap, the sensors triggered, and the doors slid back open. Julian stood at the entrance, one hand holding the elevator door, the other still clutching that file. The paper was crumpled now, covered in creases. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, he said, each word forced out like it was being squeezed through his teeth. Come to my office. My shift starts at 4 in the afternoon, then switch to the morning shift. Shift changes need supervisor Maggie's approval. I'll sign it. He stared at me, those dark eyes swirling with too many emotions for me to sort out in that moment. But one thing was clear, beyond the anger and shock, there was something else, a deep, uncontrollable fascination, like a man who thought he'd finished reading a plain, unremarkable book, tossed it on the shelf to gather dust for 3 years, only to have the wind blow it open one day and reveal pages filled with words he couldn't understand. 8 o'clock, he repeated, then he let go of the door. The elevator closed, his face disappeared behind the seam. The last image I saw was his back as he turned away, his white shirt billowing slightly in the hallway's air conditioning, the outline of his shoulder blades visible through the fabric. The elevator descended. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. Things were moving faster than I'd planned. My original plan was simple: find a job, support myself, and never see my ex-husband again. Sending that email was just instinct. Like when you see a kid about to get hit by a car, you don't stop to weigh the pros and cons. You just reach out and pull them back. That legal loophole was right in front of me. I just did what I could, but clearly, Julian wasn't going to let this slide as a just helping out moment. I knew his personality. Deep down, he had a predator's instinct, an uncontrollable need to dominate anything he couldn't predict. And right now, I was the most unpredictable variable in his world, a vase he'd kept on a shelf for 3 years, suddenly dropping from the sky to save him at his most desperate moment, then brushing off my hands and saying, I've got trash to take out. That kind of whiplash would take him a while to process. The elevator reached B1. I stepped out, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, a text from Julian. Just 3 words, see you tomorrow. I didn't reply. I shoved the phone back in my pocket and walked toward the cafeteria. The cafeteria was almost closed. The woman serving food was already packing up. When she saw me come in, she pointed impatiently at the few dishes left in the corner. That's all that's left. Hurry up if you want some. I got a plate of beef stew with potatoes over rice, carried my tray to my usual seat, and ate slowly. The cafeteria was nearly empty. The TV overhead was playing the evening news, showing a shot of Cross Tower. The voiceover said, Cross Industries stock rose against the market today, with growing optimism about its overseas litigation prospects. Growing optimism. I took another bite of my rice and chewed slowly. The news anchor's voice droned on, but my mind was still back on the 58th floor, replaying the look in Julian's eyes, that strange, sharp brightness, like he'd just discovered something he didn't know how to name. I finished my plate, scraped the leftovers into the bin, and stacked my tray with the others. The cafeteria lights flicked off behind me as I walked out into the dim corridor, the hum of the building's ventilation system the only sound. Tomorrow at 8, I'd show up. But I wasn't going to make it easy for him. The doors slid shut, his face disappearing behind the seam. The last frame I caught was his back turning away, the white shirt billowing slightly in the hallway's AC breeze, the outline of his shoulder blades visible through the fabric. The elevator descended. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. Things were moving faster than I'd anticipated. My original plan had been simple: find a job, support myself, and never cross paths with my ex-husband again. Sending that email was pure reflex. Like when you see a kid about to get hit by a car on the street, you don't stop to analyze the pros and cons, you just reach out and pull them back. When that legal loophole presented itself in front of me, I just did what came naturally. But clearly, Julian Cross wasn't going to let this slide as a random act of kindness. I knew his personality. Deep down, He had a predator's instinct, an overwhelming need to control anything that felt unpredictable, and right now, I was the most unpredictable variable in his world, a woman he'd treated as a decorative ornament for 3 years, who had swooped in to save his ass at his lowest point, then shrugged and said, "I've got trash to take out." That kind of cognitive dissonance. It was going to take him a while to digest. The elevator hit B1. I stepped out, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, a text from Julian. Just 3 words, "See you tomorrow." I didn't reply. I shoved the phone back in my pocket and headed toward the cafeteria. The cafeteria was indeed about to close. The serving ladies had already started clearing trays. When they saw me walk in, one of them pointed impatiently at a few leftover containers in the corner. "That's all that's left. Grab it fast if you want it." I grabbed a plate of braised beef over rice and carried it to my usual spot, eating slowly. The cafeteria was nearly empty. A TV mounted on the wall was playing the evening news, showing a shot of Cross Tower. The voiceover said, "Cross Industries stock rose against the trend today, with market sentiment turning optimistic about its overseas litigation prospects." Optimistic, all because of one anonymous email. I shoved the last piece of beef into my mouth, chewed, swallowed, then stood up and took my tray to the return window. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, Julian's office. I could guess what he wanted to talk about. It would be the same 3 questions. Who are you? How do you know this? Why did you hide for 3 years? The first question was the easiest. Sierra Vance, female, 26 years old, born in a small town in the Midwest, parents died young, raised by her grandmother, high school education, all of that was in his files. The second question was a little trickier. The things I knew had nothing to do with education and everything to do with experience, but that was a chapter of my past I didn't feel like revisiting, at least not right now. The third question was the simplest. It wasn't that I was hiding, it was that he'd never bothered to look. After dinner, I went back to the old apartment. I took a shower, soaked my uniform in a basin, scrubbed it, and hung it on the balcony. The evening breeze drifted in through the window, carrying the humid heat of early summer and the smoky scent of a night market barbecue stand somewhere in the distance. I leaned against the balcony railing, watching the dim streetlights below and the occasional passerby. My mind was blank. My phone buzzed again, another text from Julian. This time, longer. "Wear whatever you want tomorrow, just not your uniform." I couldn't help it. The corner of my mouth twitched. He was worried I'd show up in my janitor's grey uniform and embarrass him in front of the entire 58th floor. After all, everyone up there had seen the CEO of Cross Industries chasing a janitor down the hallway. If that same janitor walked into his office in her work clothes tomorrow, the gossip channels in the building would explode. I put the phone down, didn't reply. I was about to go to bed when my phone lit up again. I thought it was Julian again, but when I picked it up, it was an unknown number. The area code was Geneva, Switzerland. I stared at the screen for 2 seconds, then answered, "Sierra, long time no see." The voice on the other end was low, with a perfect French accent. His English had a slight upward lilt at the end of each sentence. "I saw a very interesting case in the news today. Cross Industries, global injunction. Emergency Arbitration Tribunal dismissed the application because the precedent they cited had been partially overturned." That move looked very familiar to me. I didn't say anything. "Don't play dead, Sierra." The voice laughed, with the casual, teasing tone of an old friend. "The ECJ ruling number, the effective date, the key clause comparison, that's the exact same system you used 3 years ago in Geneva. Even the formatting is identical." "Philippe," I finally spoke. "You're calling me from across the ocean just to say that?" "Of course not. I'm asking you, are you finally coming out of retirement?" "No." "Then why did you help Cross?" "Just felt like it." There was a 2-second pause on the other end. Then Philippe burst into laughter, so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "Just felt like it? My God, Sierra. Do you know how many people in the European legal circles were trying to find out who sent that email yesterday? The arbitration clerk in Geneva told me privately that during their internal discussion, one of the arbitrators said on the spot, 'This analysis is textbook material for precedent correction,' and you're telling me you just felt like it?" "I really just felt like it." Philippe stopped laughing, his tone turning serious. "Seriously, Sierra, come back. With your skills, working as a janitor at Cross Industries is a waste of life. I'll give you whatever terms you want, partnership, whatever salary you name." "Philippe," I cut him off, "I don't want to go back right now." "Because of what?" "Because of your grandmother." His voice softened. "That wasn't your fault. You know that." My fingers tightened around the phone for a moment, then relaxed. "It's not about that," I said. "I just need a break." Philippe was quiet for a moment, then sighed. Fine, I respect your decision. But remember this, Sierra, whenever you want to come back, my door is always open. You're the best legal analyst I've ever seen, 3 years ago, and still now, thank you. Oh, and one more thing. His tone turned gossipy again. I looked up Cross Industries' background. Their CEO is named Julian Cross. That name seems to have some connection to you. Not anymore. What? Do you mean, exactly what I said? Philippe clearly caught the subtext. He let out a knowing oh. He didn't press further. He just said, keep in touch, and hung up. I set the phone down on the pillow and rolled over. The night outside the window was as dark as ink. A few dog barks echoed in the distance. Geneva, 3 years. It felt like a lifetime ago, and also like yesterday. The next morning, I arrived at Cross Tower at 7:30. I wasn't wearing my uniform. I'd dug out a white blouse and black trousers from my closet, old clothes I'd brought to the Cross estate 3 years ago. Simple cut, cheap fabric, but clean and sharp. My hair was still in a low ponytail, no makeup, just a layer of clear lip balm. When I walked in through the side entrance, the security guard gave me a double take. Usually, the only people coming through the side door at this hour were janitors and maintenance staff in their work uniforms. A woman in a white blouse was a bit out of place, but he probably assumed I was a new administrative assistant, so he didn't stop me. B1, Facilities Management. Maggie was already there, sitting at her desk drinking soy milk. When she saw me push through the door, she nearly spat it out. Sierra, her eyes went wide as she looked me up and down, the cup frozen halfway to her mouth. Why aren't you in your uniform today? Maggie, I need to take a personal day, I said. I have something to handle this morning. A personal day. Maggie blinked, then something clicked in her expression, her face turned gossipy. Is this about yesterday? What did Ethan tell you? I heard Julian himself ordered your file sealed. What's going on? Maggie, I cut her off, my tone gentle but firm. I'll explain later. I need to go up now. As I turned and walked out of the office, I could still hear Maggie whispering to another cleaning lady behind me. I told you she wasn't ordinary. Look at the way she walks. That's not a janitor's walk. The elevator went up. During the morning rush, the car was packed with office workers. I stood in the corner, pressed almost flat against the wall. 2 young women next to me were discussing a PowerPoint presentation for a meeting. Across from me, a middle-aged man was checking stock prices on his phone, muttering to himself, Cross is up again, made a killing buying the dip yesterday. 56th floor, 57th, 58th. The car emptied out until I was the only one left. The doors opened onto the 58th floor. The hallway was carpeted in charcoal grey, quiet as a library. Morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden bands across the carpet. I stepped out and walked toward the end of the hall. The Apex room's doors were closed, the lights off inside. The scent of coffee drifted from the break room. Someone was talking in low voices. I kept walking, past the corner where I'd run into Ethan last night, past the janitor's closet. The old computer was still inside, sitting quietly on that beat-up desk, as if nothing had happened. At the end of the hall, the CEO's office door was slightly ajar. I stood there for 1 second, then I raised my hand and knocked. Come in. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Julian's office was huge, almost cavernous. The entire wall was floor-to-ceiling windows facing the city skyline. The morning sunlight poured in, filling the room with a bright, cold clarity. His desk was a massive slab of dark wood, holding 2 monitors, a stack of files, and a cup of black coffee still steaming. Julian sat behind the desk, wearing a dark blue shirt with the cuffs buttoned neatly, a silver grey tie tied perfectly. He looked different from last night. Last night, he was a cornered animal blindsided by a crisis. This morning, he was back to being the cool, precise, unflappable CEO of Cross Industries. But when he looked up at me, I still caught a flicker in his eyes. His gaze traveled from my face to my white blouse, then back to my eyes. He stared at me for about 3 seconds, then gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sit. I sat. The chair was leather. It was comfortable, 100 times better than the plastic chair in the janitor's closet. The office fell silent for a few seconds. Julian picked up his coffee cup, took a sip, set it down, and tapped his fingers on the desk twice. I'd seen that gesture before. It was what he did when he had something difficult to say. I had you investigated last night, he finally said, his tone flat, like he was reporting on a project, from top to bottom. And what did you find? Nothing. He said it with a barely concealed look of frustration. Your background is too clean. High school education, no higher education records, no legal qualifications, no public record of any legal case involvement. You're a blank slate. He paused, leaning forward slightly, his hands folded on the desk. But you're not a blank slate. It was a statement, not a question. A woman from a small town with a high school education couldn't have identified a legal trap set by a top-tier European law firm in 5 minutes. Someone with no professional record couldn't have written that level of case analysis. A woman who spent 3 years as a housewife couldn't. He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. Couldn't have Philippe Dubois personally calling to poach you. My eyebrow twitched. Philippe, that guy says keep in touch, and then he turns around and calls Julian. What the hell is he playing at? Last night at 11 o'clock, I got a call from Geneva. Julian looked me straight in the eye, speaking each word with deliberate weight. Philippe Dubois, founding partner of Dubois & Partners, top 3 international litigation lawyers in the world, a legend in European legal circles. He told me that if I wanted to know who sent that email, I should look at the most inconspicuous person in my orbit. He took a deep breath, his chest rose and fell. He said that person was the only one he'd ever wanted to poach. And couldn't. The office fell silent. From somewhere far below, the faint honk of a car drifted up through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The sunlight had shifted a few more inches, pooling on the edge of his desk and illuminating the crumpled printout of my email that still lay there. I sat in the chair, hands resting on my knees, my back ramrod straight. Philippe has a flair for exaggeration, I said. So it's true. What's true? All of it. Julian stood up, walked around his desk, and leaned against the edge directly in front of me, looking down. Sierra Vance, who the hell are you? I met his gaze. The sun was behind him, carving sharp, angular shadows across his face. He had a good-looking face. I'd known that since the day I married him 3 years ago, but right now, there was an expression on it I'd never seen before. Not coldness, not condescension. It was something else, a stubborn, earnest curiosity, the kind that only comes when someone has been genuinely hooked. He was really looking at me. 3 years. This was the first time he'd ever truly, seriously looked at me. I'm Sierra Vance, I said, your ex-wife. Up until yesterday, I was a janitor in your building. That's not what I'm asking. Then what are you asking? The line of Julian's jaw tightened, then relaxed, then tightened again. He suddenly leaned down, planting his hands on the armrests of my chair, caging me in his shadow. He was too close, close enough that I could smell the faint cedarwood of his cologne, close enough that I could see the red veins threading through his eyes. He definitely hadn't slept well. What I'm asking, he said, his voice dropping low, carrying a tension that had been building for a while, is just how capable you really are, that you could spend 3 years being treated like a ghost by me, and then, without a word, save my ass. He was too close. I leaned back, the chair's backrest pressing into my spine. I wasn't saving you, I said, I was saving the problem. That email was about. The fact that it was your problem was just a coincidence. Coincidence. He repeated the word, a strange, unreadable smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Then why didn't you just tell me who you were? What difference would it have made? I looked at him, my voice flat. When we got married 3 years ago, the contract was clear, mutual benefit, no interference. You needed a wife to satisfy your family's expectations. I needed money for my grandmother's medical bills. Transaction complete. Nobody owes anybody anything. We got divorced yesterday. Transaction's over. I was just looking for a job to support myself. As for that email, I paused. I saw it. I could solve it. So I solved it. It's that simple. Julian was silent. He stayed where he was, frozen in that bent-over position, staring at me without moving. The air in the office felt thick and heavy, like it had congealed into something solid. After a long moment, he straightened up and stepped back. Putting distance between us, he turned toward the window. His back to me, one hand in his pocket, the other pressed against the window frame from behind. His shoulders were broad, his waist narrow, the hem of his dark blue shirt was tucked neatly into his suit pants. He stood there like a silent, solitary pine. 3 years, he said, his voice no longer aggressive. Instead, it carried a note of exhaustion I couldn't quite place. You were by my side for 3 years, and I never once asked you a single question about yourself. I didn't respond. I knew about your grandmother, but other than that, where you came from, what you liked, what you could do, I knew nothing. He turned back to face me. The sunlight split his face into light and shadow, dividing it in two, and I never thought to find out. So what are you feeling right now? I asked. Resentment, or like you've been deceived? Neither. He shook his head, his expression stubbornly earnest. Curiosity. Curiosity. Yeah. He looked at me, his gaze dark and dense, like ink that wouldn't dissolve. I want to know what kind of person you really are. That answer caught me off guard. I'd expected him to be angry, to feel insulted, to demand why I'd been hiding things, But instead, he said curiosity, and when he said it, his tone was genuine, not fake politeness. Not a condescending appraisal, it was a raw, sincere curiosity, born from being genuinely moved by something. I hadn't seen that look in a long time. You'll find out soon enough, I said, standing up. With your resources and connections, it won't take long to dig up my background. I don't want to dig, I froze. What you dig up is dead, Julian said. I want to hear it from you, and if I don't want to tell you. He looked at me, and then he smiled, not the bitter, forced smile from last night. This one was lighter, softer, carrying a hint of something I couldn't name, something almost tender. Then I'll wait. When he said those 3 words, his eyes didn't waver, they held mine without flinching. I'll admit it, for a split second, my heart skipped a beat, not because his smile was handsome, though it was, but because when he said I'll wait, there was a patience and certainty in his voice that I'd never seen in Julian Cross before, like a hunter putting down his bow, not because he'd given up on the prey, but because he'd decided to approach it a different way. My shift starts at 4, I said, looking away, changing the subject. You need to clear it with Maggie, or I'll get marked as absent. Julian blinked, then let out a short laugh. That smile was bigger than any I'd seen from him before. The fine lines at the corners of his eyes crinkled. He rubbed his forehead and shook his head, like he couldn't quite figure me out. Sierra, I just told you I'm willing to wait for you to open up, and you're talking to me about your shift schedule. Work is work, I said, one thing at a time. Fine. He walked back to his desk, picked up the phone, and pressed an extension. Ethan. Notify facilities, Sierra Vance is being reassigned effective immediately. I opened my mouth to object, but he held up a hand to stop me. Not leaving the department, he said into the phone, his eyes still on me. Internal reassignment within facilities, switching from night shift to day shift. Her area changes from floors 56 to 58 to the administrative desk in the facilities office. Same pay, no uniform required. He hung up and raised an eyebrow at me. Does that work? What does the admin desk do? Sitting in an office, managing the schedule, tracking cleaning supply inventory, taking maintenance calls from different floors. He walked back behind his desk, picked up his now cold coffee, and took a sip. Easier than mopping floors. I studied him. This man was playing games. The admin desk was in the B1 facilities office, right next to Maggie's office. Anyone coming or going would have to pass through HR and admin's line of sight. In other words, he was taking me from being an anonymous janitor and turning me into a formal staff member with a fixed desk and a daily punch card, so that whenever he wanted to find me, he could, without having to chase me through the whole building. Fine, I said. Work was work, and the admin desk was definitely easier than hauling trash. Julian looked surprised that I agreed so quickly. He stared at me for 2 seconds, then slid a folder across the desk. What's this? New employment contract. Your position changed, so we need a new one. I opened the folder and read through it from start to finish. Standard terms. Salary was 1,000 more than the janitor position. Full health insurance and 401k, 1 month probation. The only thing that stood out was the last addendum. I glanced up at him. The employee agrees not to operate any computer terminal within the employer's premises without prior authorization. I read the clause out loud. This is aimed at me. Better safe than sorry. Julian's face was completely straight. I'll have the old computer in the janitor's closet removed. You're using your authority to settle a personal score. I don't have a score to settle. He looked at me, his eyes deep and serious. I just don't want my ex-wife hiding in a janitor's closet and secretly playing my behind-the-scenes strategist anymore. When he said ex-wife, his tone was strange, not like he was drawing a line, more like he was reminding himself that something had already happened. I signed the contract and put the pen down. If there's nothing else, I'll head down to facilities to check in. Wait, I stood up and looked at him. Julian pulled something out of his drawer and slid it across the desk. A phone, brand new, still in its sealed box, the latest model, definitely not cheap. What's this? A phone? He said. Your old one has a cracked screen. I couldn't stand looking at it. I'll buy my own. It's not a gift. He leaned back in his chair, slipping back into his standard CEO persona, cold, with a hint of unyielding authority. It's company equipment. The admin desk needs to be reachable. I didn't move. Take it, he said, or I'll have someone deliver it to the facilities office in front of everyone. I picked up the phone and shoved it into my pocket. One more thing. Julian's tone shifted, becoming more serious. When Philippe called last night, he said one more thing to me. What was it? I walked over, picked up the file, and flipped it open. The terms were standard salary bumped up by 1,000 from the janitor's pay, full health insurance and 401k, a 1-month probationary period. The only extra was a final clause tacked on at the end. I skimmed it, then looked up at him. The second party agrees not to operate any computer terminal equipment within the first party's office premises without authorization. I read the addendum out loud. This is aimed at me, isn't it? Better safe than sorry. Julian Cross didn't flinch. I'll have that old computer in the janitor's closet removed. This is personal revenge. I have no grudges. He held my gaze, his eyes deep and serious. I just don't want my ex-wife hiding in a janitor's closet, playing my secret strategist anymore. The way he said ex-wife had a strange weight to it. It didn't sound like he was drawing a line, more like he was reminding himself that something had already happened. I signed the contract, put the pen down. If there's nothing else, I'll head to facilities to check in. Wait, I stood up and looked at him. Julian pulled something out of his desk drawer and slid it across the table. A phone, brand new, still sealed, top-of-the-line model, clearly not cheap. What's this? A phone, he said. Your old one has a cracked screen. I couldn't stand looking at it. I'll buy my own. It's not a gift. He leaned back in his chair, slipping into his usual CEO persona, cold, with a faint, unyielding edge. It's company equipment. An administrative role requires constant communication. I didn't move. Take it, he said, or I'll have someone deliver it to facilities in front of the whole department. I picked up the phone and shoved it into my pocket. One more thing. Julian's tone shifted, turning serious. When Philippe called last night, he told me something else. What? He said you left Geneva 3 years ago because of an accident, not because you weren't capable. Julian looked at me, his gaze probing, carrying a hint of concern he barely masked. What kind of accident? My expression didn't change, but my fingers tightened slightly around the phone box. Nothing. Sierra, Mr. Cross. I cut him off, my voice flat and cold. If there's nothing else, I need to report to facilities. I turned and walked toward the door. Just as I reached it, Julian's voice came from behind me, low and clear. You don't have to tell me now, but I won't stop asking until you do. I paused, my hand on the doorknob, for 1 second, then I pulled the door open and stepped out the hallway. Lights were still bright and quiet. I walked a few steps, stopped beside a potted plant, leaned against the wall, closed my eyes, and took a deep breath. I didn't want to talk about what happened 3 years ago. Those events weren't just about my past, they involved Grandma Rose. Before she passed, she held my hand and said, Sierra, that thing wasn't your fault. Those people were too cruel. Promise me you won't touch that world again. Find a steady job, live a quiet life. I promised. That's why I was here, in a janitor's uniform, mopping floors and scrubbing toilets, but fate had a sick sense of humor. I'd run for 3 years, hidden for 3 years, and one casual email had dragged everything back. Philippe's call, Julian's questions, the attention from the European legal community. It all felt like a tightening net, pulling me back into a world I wanted to leave behind. I stood in the hallway for 2 minutes, then straightened my collar and walked to the elevator when the doors opened. Someone was inside. Ethan Cole. When he saw me, his composure shattered, his face twitched, and he stammered with a tone of extreme survival instinct. Sierra. No, Ms. Vance. Wait, that's not, just call me Sierra. Right, Ms. Vance. No. Sierra. A thin layer of sweat broke out on Ethan's forehead. I just want to confirm, are you really the wife from 3 years ago? Yes. Ethan sucked in a sharp breath. His expression suggested he was mentally replaying every impression he'd had of me over the past 3 years, only to find a blank slate, because he'd barely seen me. The few times we'd crossed paths, it was just a fleeting glance, never a clear look at my face. Oh my God, he muttered to himself. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, the elevator's here. I reminded him. Right. He stumbled out, took a few steps, then turned back to look at me. His eyes were full of awe, confusion, and the painful struggle of processing this bombshell. I stepped into the elevator and pressed B1 as the doors slid shut. I heard Ethan calling someone outside, his voice low but unable to hide his excitement. You'll never guess who sent that email. It was her. The elevator descended, the floor numbers ticking down one by one. I leaned against the wall, my fingers brushing against the new phone box in my pocket, its sharp edges pressed into my palm. B1 arrived, the doors opened, and the smell of breakfast from the cafeteria mixed with the scent of disinfectant drifted through the hallway. A few cleaning ladies pushed their carts past me, greeting me with, "Morning, Sierra, morning." I walked toward the facilities office, my pace steady. The hem of my white shirt fluttered slightly in the draft from the hallway, and my shoes clicked crisply on the concrete floor. The sound of the elevator doors closing behind me was like a soft sigh. sealing all the turbulence of the 58th floor away. At the end of the hallway, inside the facilities office, Maggie was staring at a new schedule with a bewildered expression. The words read, Sierra Vance, position change, janitor to administrative staff, effective immediately. She looked up as I pushed the door open, her face like someone who'd binge-watched an entire season of a thriller, only to realize there was another season coming. Sierra, she held up the schedule, explain this to me. I sat down across from her, folding my hands on the table. Maggie, here's the thing, outside the window, the early summer sun had fully risen, casting golden light across the glass facade of Cross Tower. The entire building was buzzing with the start of a busy day. No one knew that in the CEO's office on the 58th floor, a man was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, sipping cold coffee, replaying every detail of last night and this morning in his mind. On his desk lay a divorce decree. The one signed 3 years ago had been pulled out. The edges of the paper were slightly yellowed, but the two signatures were still clear. Julian Cross written in bold, forceful strokes, and Sierra Vance in neat, delicate handwriting. He traced his finger over those 3 letters, as if sketching a name he'd never truly looked at before. Then he picked up the desk phone and dialed an internal line. Ethan, pull every file on Sierra Vance from 3 years ago, every document, every page. Don't miss a single detail. Everything, everything. He hung up, his gaze lingering on the divorce decree for a long time. Then he did something even he found unbelievable. He picked up the document and slowly, deliberately, tore it in half. The administrative job was busier than I'd imagined on my first day. Maggie dropped a thick stack of folders on my desk, past 3 months of shift records, supply requisitions, equipment maintenance logs, all needing to be entered into the system. I spent the entire morning getting through a third of it, my fingers burning from typing. At lunch in the cafeteria, the server lady did a double take when she saw me and said, "Why'd you change clothes?" I told her I'd switched positions. She just grunted and added an extra scoop of braised pork to my plate. 4 days passed like that. I clocked in and out on time every day, sitting in the small cubicle in the B1 facilities office, entering data. Occasionally, a floor would call in a repair request, a leaky faucet in the restroom or a broken coffee machine in the break room, and I'd log it and schedule a maintenance worker. The work was tedious, but definitely easier than mopping floors. Plus, I could wear my own clothes instead of a uniform in those 4 days. I never went back to the 58th floor, but I knew what Julian was doing. Philippe called me again the next day. This time during the day, his tone carried a hint of schadenfreude. Sierra, your ex-husband is hilarious. He actually sent someone to Geneva to dig up your files. What files? Every case you handled for me, internal training records, even those legal opinions you drafted. The guy he sent had an authorization letter and was very aggressive, saying it was part of Cross Industries' internal investigation. Philippe chuckled. I didn't give him anything, of course. I told him if he wanted the files, your Mr. Cross would have to come negotiate with me personally. Did he go? Not yet. But I think he will. Sierra, your ex-husband's interest in you seems to go way beyond business investigation. I didn't take the bait. I mumbled a few polite words and hung up. Philippe was right. Julian was digging into my past, and he was persistent. He hadn't used company resources. He'd hired a third-party background investigation firm, starting from my registered address and working backward. I found out about this through Ethan, who accidentally let it slip. I ran into him in the cafeteria. He sat down across from me with a plate of braised ribs and lowered his voice. Sierra, Mr. Cross hasn't been sleeping much lately. He's up until midnight reading the reports the investigators send back. What does that have to do with me? Ethan opened his mouth, hesitated, then sighed and focused on his ribs. On the afternoon of the 5th day, things changed. I was in the office organizing supply requisitions when my desk phone rang. I picked it up. Julian's voice came through. No pleasantries. Straight to the point. Come up. There's a document I need you to look at. What kind of document? You'll see when you get here. He hung up. I stared at the receiver for 2 seconds, then put it down, told Maggie, and took the elevator to the 58th floor. This time, no one stopped me in the hallway. The receptionist just nodded, her eyes full of curiosity but her lips sealed. The Apex room door was closed, muffled voices coming from inside. I kept walking to the CEO's office and knocked. Come in. I pushed the door open. Julian was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to me. He was wearing a navy blue shirt today, sleeves rolled up to his elbows as usual, revealing the sharp lines of his forearms. He didn't turn around when he heard my footsteps. He just pointed at a file on his desk. Take a look. I walked over, picked up the file, and opened it. It was an English contract, hundreds of pages long, with the European Union Business Merger Committee's logo on the cover. I flipped through the first few pages quickly, my brow furrowing. It was a pre-review document for a cross-border merger, involving EU market access issues. The legal clauses were incredibly complex, and the jurisdictional dispute clauses were buried so subtly that you'd miss them if you weren't paying close attention. Who drafted this for you? Our cooperating law firm in Europe. Julian turned around, crossing his arms and leaning against the window frame. Legal reviewed it twice and said it was fine, but something feels off to me. What feels off? I can't put my finger on it. He frowned, as if trying to articulate a gut feeling. Just an instinct. I looked back down at the file. The office fell silent, broken only by the rustle of paper. When I reached page 73, my fingers stopped. I found it. The desk phone rang. I picked it up. On the other end was Julian Cross's voice. No pleasantries, straight to the point. Come up here. There's a document I need you to look at. What kind of document? You'll know when you get here. He hung up. I held the receiver for a couple of seconds, staring at it, then set it down. I told Maggie I was stepping out and took the elevator up to the 58th floor. This time, no one stopped me in the hallway. The girl at the reception desk just nodded, her eyes full of obvious curiosity but her lips sealed. The door to the Apex room was closed, muffled voices drifting out from inside. I kept walking until I reached the door to the CEO's office. I knocked. Come in. I pushed the door open. Julian was standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to me. He was wearing a navy blue dress shirt today. Sleeves rolled up to his elbows as usual, revealing the clean lines of his forearms. He didn't turn around when he heard my footsteps. Instead, he just pointed a finger at a document lying on his desk. Take a look. I walked over and picked it up. Flipping it open, I saw it was an English contract. Thick, probably over 200 pages. The cover bore the emblem of the European Union's Commercial Merger Commission. I skimmed the first few pages, and my brow furrowed slightly. This was a pre-clearance document for a cross-border merger, touching on EU market access issues. The legal clauses were incredibly complex, and the jurisdiction dispute provisions were buried so deep and so cleverly that you'd never spot the problem without a very careful read. Who drafted this for you? Our cooperating law firm in Europe. Julian turned around, crossed his arms, and leaned against the window frame. The legal department reviewed it twice. They said it was clean, but something feels off to me. What feels off? I can't put my finger on it. He frowned, as if trying to articulate a gut feeling. Just a hunch. I looked back down at the document. The office fell silent, broken only by the rustle of pages. When I reached page 73, my fingers stopped. There it was, a clause about jurisdiction disputes. On the surface, it looked like standard legal boilerplate, but it was actually a trap, a selective jurisdiction clause. Under its terms, the signing party would, by default, submit to the unilateral jurisdiction of the acquirer's home country in the event of a dispute. In other words, if they signed this contract, Cross Industries would lose all right to choose the arbitration venue. They'd be forced to accept whatever jurisdiction the other side dictated. The technique was sophisticated. The trap was wrapped in 3 layers of normal legal language. An average legal professional would never see it coming. But I had seen it before. Page 73, paragraphs 3 through 5. I set the document back on the desk and tapped the text with my finger. Selective jurisdiction trap. They preset the venue for dispute resolution. On paper, it looks bilateral. In reality, it's unilateral coercion. Julian walked over, bent down, and looked. He studied it closely, his frown deepening with each passing second. 37 people in the legal department, 2 rounds of review, no one caught it. His tone wasn't a question, it was a statement about a fact he was finding harder and harder to ignore. This trap was designed at a very high level, I said. Anyone not intimately familiar with the EU's jurisdictional amendments over the last 3 years would easily miss it. It's not that your legal team is incompetent, it's that the opponent is too professional. Then how did you see it? I paused. That question wasn't easy to answer. Not because I couldn't say it, but because saying it would drag up too much of the past experience, I said, settling on just that one word. Julian's gaze on me deepened. He didn't press further. But I could feel his eyes linger on my face for a long time, like he was reading a book he thought he'd already finished, only to discover every page was new. This contract needs to be signed the day after tomorrow. He closed the document and walked back behind his desk to sit down. Without you, Cross Industries would face at least one cross-border jurisdiction dispute within 3 months of the contract taking effect. The worst-case scenario is we get dragged into the jurisdiction they've chosen. That would cost at least 2 years of time and at least 500 million in litigation costs. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded over his stomach, his heavy gaze fixed on me. Sierra Vance, this is the second time. The second time for what? The second time you've casually solved a problem I couldn't solve myself. When he said it, there was a strange emotion in his voice. Not gratitude, not resentment. It was the dawning realization of someone whose defenses had been completely shattered. The first time, you said you just did it because you saw it and it was convenient. What about the second time? I was silent for 2 seconds. You asked me to help, I said. That's not convenient. Julian froze for a moment, then laughed. It wasn't that exasperated smirk or that faint, dismissive curve he'd shown before. It was a real laugh, one that genuinely amused him. It started at the corners of his mouth and spread all the way to his eyes, crinkling them. In the 3 years I'd known him, I'd never seen him laugh like that. Fine, I owe you one. He reined in the laugh, but the amusement hadn't faded from his eyes. I'll make it up to you. No need, I said. You pay me a salary. This is my job. Your current position is administrative support. Your contract doesn't include reviewing cross-border merger documents, then call it overtime. Julian stared at me for 3 seconds, then he pulled a folder out of his drawer, flipped it open, and scribbled a few lines on one page. He turned the folder around and slid it across the desk to me. It was my employment contract. In the blank space at the bottom of the last page, he had handwritten an addendum in bold, forceful strokes. Employee voluntarily assumes responsibility for reviewing cross-border legal documents. Each document reviewed shall be compensated separately. Sign it, he said. You didn't give me a pen. He pulled a fountain pen from the holder, unscrewed the cap, and handed it to me. I took it and signed my name beneath the line he'd written. Julian took the contract back, glanced at it, then closed the folder and set it aside. He looked up at me, his expression turning more serious. I need to tell you something. Go ahead. Philippe Dubois sent me an email, a long one. He laced his fingers together on the desk, speaking slowly, as if thinking out loud. In it, he mentioned someone. He said this person was the most talented legal analyst he'd seen in 30 years of practice. At 23, she single-handedly built the entire evidence chain for an EU antitrust investigation. At 24, she became the youngest project lead under him. At 25, she won all 7 cross-border cases she handled, 3 of which were written into casebooks at European law schools. He paused, his eyes locked on mine without blinking. Then, at 26, that person suddenly disappeared. No warning, no explanation. Her resignation letter said only 4 words. Personal reasons. Outside the window, a cloud drifted in front of the sun, dimming the light in the office by a few degrees. The hum of the air conditioner suddenly felt deafeningly loud. Do you know who that person is? Julian asked. My hand, still holding the pen, didn't move. My expression didn't change. 3 years ago, the weather had been just like this. Geneva's summers were dry and bright. The Dubois and Partners office was on the top floor of an old building by the lake. From the window, you could see white sails dotting the surface of Lake Geneva. I had just won a case. Philippe was opening champagne in the office to celebrate, the whole team laughing. My phone rang. It was a number from back home. I answered. On the other end was the nurse, Xiao Chen, her voice choked with tears. Miss Vance, your grandmother, she's not doing well. Please come back as soon as you can. I booked the earliest flight. 12 hours later, I landed. I took a cab straight to the hospital, but Grandma Rose was already in the ICU, hooked up to tubes everywhere. The doctor said it was a cerebral hemorrhage. By the time they found her, it was too late. She was in a coma for a whole week. In the end, she passed away. She was lucid only a few times. Once, she opened her eyes briefly, recognized me, and reached up with her wrinkled hand to touch my face. Her voice was hoarse. Sierra, that thing, it wasn't your fault. Those people, they're just bad. On the 3rd day she was in the ICU, I got a call in the hospital hallway from an unfamiliar number. A man's voice came through, fast, with a thick local accent. Miss Vance, right, we're sorry about your grandmother, but let me tell you something, leave some leeway for yourself. Those cases you helped people win in Europe, you made some powerful enemies. This time, it was just a warning. The line went dead. I stood in the hospital corridor. The fluorescent lights above were a harsh, blinding white. The smell of disinfectant stung my nose. Outside the window, the city was grey and hazy, a world away from Geneva's blue skies and white clouds. A week later, Grandma Rose was gone. I gave up my apartment in Geneva. I turned off my phone. I switched to a domestic number. I deleted all contact information related to my work. keeping only Philippe's personal number because I knew he wouldn't reach out unless I contacted him first. He was a man of discretion. Then I married Julian Cross. The reason was simple: I needed someone who could cover the rest of my grandmother's medical bills and funeral costs. He needed a docile, obedient wife to fend off his family's pressure to marry, a trade of needs. No debts between us for 3 years. Julian never asked about my past. I never brought it up. We were like two parallel lines, living under the same roof, leading separate lives. He ran his company. I kept my silence until the day he signed the papers at City Hall and kicked me out, until I sent that one email from the janitor's closet. It was me, I said. The silence in the office stretched for a full 5 seconds. In those 5 seconds, Julian's expression went through several layers of change. First came confirmation. He had already guessed, but hearing it from my own mouth hit him harder than he'd expected. Then came something complex. Something hard to name, like a man who suddenly realized the old book he'd casually thrown away was a rare edition others would beg on their knees to possess. Finally, his gaze settled on something I had never seen in him before. Not anger, not resentment, not the irritation of being deceived. It was a deep, serious, almost reverent stare. At 23, you single-handedly handled an entire EU antitrust investigation, he began, his voice much lower now, as if afraid speaking too loudly would shatter something fragile. At 24, you became Du Bois' youngest project lead. At 25, your cases were written into textbooks. With every sentence, he leaned forward a little more. By the end, his elbows were on the desk, and he was close enough that I could see the curve of his eyelashes and my own reflection in his pupils. And then you married me. You lived in my house for 3 years as a silent, invisible presence. You needed a wife to deal with your family. I said, I needed money. It was a fair trade. No one owes anyone anything. Fair. He repeated the word, his Adam's apple bobbing. You think that's fair? What's unfair about it? It's unfair to you. When he said it, there was an emotion in his voice I had never heard from him before. Guilt. Faint. So faint that if I didn't know him as well as I did, I would have missed it. But it was real. I never knew you had these skills. I never knew you were stronger than my entire legal department combined. I never knew you were better than those lawyers in Europe who charge tens of millions. I never knew you could see through legal traps that no one else could. He stopped abruptly because he realized that everything he was saying pointed to one brutal truth. That for the past 3 years, he had been a terrible husband. Even if it was a marriage of convenience, he had never fulfilled the most basic obligation to get to know the person living under the same roof as him. Do you know how I feel right now? He asked me. Regret? No. He shook his head, and the light in his eyes grew bright, bright as a searchlight in the dead of night. It's falling for you. Right then, the cloud that had been blocking the sun drifted away. Sunlight poured back into the room, flooding the entire desk and the papers on it. The light was so strong it made me squint slightly. Then I looked back at him. His expression changed. It was no longer the probing, curious, or guilty look from before. It was something more direct, more unguarded. It was the look of a hunter who had laid down his weapon, standing before his prey, openly declaring, I'm not going to catch you, I want to walk with you. That kind of expression, on the face of a man who never admitted defeat, was devastating. I instinctively looked away. Mr. Cross, call me by my name, Julian, he just hummed in response, his voice soft, the tail of it lifting slightly as if he was waiting for me to continue. We're divorced, I said, 5 days ago, signed at City Hall, your signature, I know. So whether you're feeling something or not, that's your problem now. Julian froze for a moment. Then, instead of arguing or defending himself, he did something I never expected. He reached over and pressed the intercom button on his desk, hitting the speakerphone. 2 rings, and then Ethan's voice answered. Mr. Cross, Ethan, bring in a paper shredder. A paper shredder? Yes. 3 minutes later, Ethan wheeled a small shredder into the office. When he saw me sitting on the couch, a flicker of understanding crossed his eyes. He silently set the shredder down, plugged it in, and stepped to the side. Julian pulled the divorce decree from his drawer. The edges of the paper were slightly yellowed, but the signatures and red stamps were still clear. He held it up, paused for half a second above the shredder's opening, and then fed it in. The blades began to spin, slicing the paper into even strips that fell like snowflakes into the bin below. First the margins, then the body, and finally the signature. Julian Cross was cut into dozens of tiny shreds, mingling with Sierra Vance until they were indistinguishable. Ethan's eyes nearly popped out of his head. Mr. Cross. That's the City Hall filed copy. Ripping it up now doesn't change the legal standing. I know, Julian pressed the stop button and brushed non-existent dust off his hands. I'm not ripping up the legal standing. He turned to look at me, his gaze deep and burning. I'm ripping up my own pride. The office fell so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Ethan swallowed hard, wearing an expression that screamed, who am I? Where am I? Why am I here eating this romantic tension? He took 2 silent steps back, then turned and slipped out, pulling the door shut behind him. It was just Julian and me. He walked around the desk and crouched in front of me, not looking down from a height, but crouching so that as I sat on the couch, we were eye to eye, or I was slightly higher. He looked up at me, every line of his eyes and lips radiating sincerity. You don't have to accept it, he said, but I'm not giving up. My heart really did skip a beat at that moment, not because of how sweet his words were, but because of how completely defenseless his gaze was. When a man who spent his life wrapped in armor suddenly strips it all off in front of you, showing you the softest part of himself, that kind of look hits harder than any sweet talk. You weren't like this before, I said. Before, I didn't know what you were like. And now you do, a little, he said. The more I know, the more I want to keep knowing. I looked down at him. The sunlight streamed in from behind him, gilding his hair in a golden halo. His eyelashes cast thin shadows on his cheeks, his irises were pure black, like polished obsidian, and my face was clearly reflected in them in that moment. He wasn't the CEO of Cross Industries, he wasn't the lofty heir of the Cross family, he wasn't the ex-husband who had signed the divorce papers and walked away without looking back. He was just a man crouching in front of me, saying seriously, I'm not giving up. You've got me all mixed up. I admitted, I was planning to quit. These past few days, Julian's eyelid twitched. But now I'm not, I said. He froze for a second, and then the light in his eyes slowly began to glow. It was strange, his expression barely changed, but you could see the light in his eyes, from nothing to something, from faint to bright, like someone had lit a lamp inside them. So, when he spoke, his voice carried a carefully restrained hope. You're willing to give me a chance. I'm giving you a chance to get to know me again. I corrected, not to get back together. Okay, he agreed. Without hesitation, the light in his eyes growing even brighter. Getting to know you again, from scratch. He stood up, straightened his collar, and then suddenly extended his right hand to me. Hello, my name is Julian Cross. The gesture was so abrupt that I froze for half a second before reaching out and taking his hand. His palm was dry and warm, his fingers well-defined. He held my hand with just the right amount of pressure, not too firm, not too light. He bent slightly at the waist, making the handshake feel like a genuine first meeting. Hello, I said. My name is Sierra Vance. The corners of his mouth slowly curved up. Sierra Vance. He rolled the name over his tongue, as if tasting something sweet he'd never experienced before. It's a pleasure to meet you. His gaze moved from my eyes to the corner of my mouth, then back to my eyes. It was no longer the indifference and carelessness of 3 years ago, nor the shock and confusion of 5 days ago. It was the look of a man seeing a woman for the first time, truly seeing her, with nothing else in his eyes outside the window. The sunlight grew brighter, the city's skyline sharp and clear in the light. In the distance, pigeons took off from a clock tower, their wings cutting across the sky, leaving an invisible arc. Julian let go of my hand but didn't step back. He stood there, looking down at me. On the first day of getting to know you, he said, I'd like to take you to dinner. I have to work late tonight to enter the schedule. Maggie said it has to be submitted by tomorrow. His expression stiffened for a moment, then he took a deep breath, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number right in front of me. Maggie, the schedule entry for facilities can be delayed by 2 days. Sierra doesn't need to work late tonight. On the other end of the line, Maggie's voice came through, shocked and bewildered. Of course, Mr. Cross, whatever you say. He hung up, put the phone back in his pocket, and raised an eyebrow at me. No more overtime now. I looked at his expression, which clearly said, problem solved. What's your excuse now? And couldn't help but find it a little amusing. He had no idea that in this moment, he looked nothing like the aloof, untouchable Mr. Cross everyone knew. Are you planning to use your authority to pursue me? Is that not allowed? It is. I stood up and tugged at the hem of my shirt. But let me make it clear, I'm not picky about where I eat, but I am picky about taste. No cilantro, nothing too spicy, and I'm allergic to seafood. Got it. Julian picked up his car keys from the desk. No cilantro, no spicy food, seafood allergy, anything else? Not for now. Then let's go. He walked to the door and held it open for me, gesturing for me to go first. As I walked past him, I caught the faint scent of his pine cologne, mixed with the warmth of sunlight. It felt warmer than it ever had before in the hallway. Ethan was standing by the assistant's desk, pretending to look at his phone, but his ears were practically perked up like antennas. When he saw us come out, he quickly pocketed his phone and stood at attention, eyes forward. "Ethan, cancel my appointments for tonight," Julian said as he walked. "Also, move tomorrow morning's meeting to the afternoon." "Yes, Mr. Cross," Ethan responded quickly. Then, as I passed him, he whispered in a voice only I could hear, "Miss Vance, you saved all of us." I glanced sideways at him. He gave me a thumbs up, unable to suppress the grin on his face. The elevator arrived. Julian held the door open for me, let me enter first, then followed and pressed the button for the lobby. The elevator descended slowly. The numbers on the panel ticked down one by one, 57, 56, 55. It was just the two of us in the elevator, so quiet you could hear each other's breathing. I stood on the left, he on the right, about a step apart. He turned his head to look at me, his gaze direct and unapologetic. "What are you looking at?" "You," he said. I never really looked before. My ears felt a little warm, but my face remained expressionless. The elevator reached the lobby, the doors opened, the lobby was bustling, and the receptionist's eyes went wide with shock and gossip when she saw Julian Cross walking out of the elevator with a woman she didn't recognize. A few employees waiting for the elevator froze, some even forgetting to step in, standing there dumbfounded as they watched their aloof CEO personally hold the elevator door for a plainly dressed woman. Julian didn't seem to notice, or maybe he just didn't care. He led me through the lobby. As we reached the entrance, the glass doors slid open automatically, triggered by the sensors. The early summer breeze hit us, carrying the scent of sycamore trees from the street and the fragrance of flowers from a nearby shop. His car was parked at the curb, a black Panamera. He opened the passenger door, his hand shielding the top of the doorframe, and waited until I was seated before walking around to the driver's side. The engine started, low and smooth. "What do you feel like eating?" he asked as he buckled his seatbelt. "Anything's fine." "Then I'll choose." He pulled out of the underground garage and merged into the evening traffic. The streetlights had just come on, casting an orange glow that filtered through the car windows into a warm, cozy hue. The car's stereo automatically connected to his phone, playing an old English song with a slow, gentle melody. I leaned back in my seat, watching the city flow by outside the window, and felt a strange sensation rise in my chest. "Grandma Rose, can you see this? It looks like I'm about to start living a good life." Julian's fingers rested on the steering wheel, tapping softly along with the music. He didn't ask any more questions, didn't rush to push anything forward. He just drove quietly, occasionally glancing over at me, his gaze tender and full of care. Outside the window, the city's night was slowly lighting up, one window at a time. The glow of countless homes spilled from the high-rise apartments, like thousands of stars scattered across the ground. The road ahead was still long, but at least in this moment, everything felt just right.